The morning the Alpha King came to choose a Luna, I was on my knees polishing silver I would not be allowed to eat from. That was the shape of my whole life in the house of Hargrove, if you wanted it in a single picture. The good plates, the bright ones, the ones that caught the candlelight, those were for the family and for guests, and for the daughters of other houses who came in their fine dresses to be looked at. I cleaned them, I stacked them, I carried them. And when the meal was done, I scraped what was left of them into the slop bucket and ate if I ate standing up in the kitchen from a chipped wooden bowl, the way you feed a dog you have not quite decided to keep. I had learned not to mind it. That is a thing you can teach yourself, given enough years not to mind. You take the part of you that minds, and you fold it up very small, and you put it somewhere deep, and you go on. I was good at going on. It was by then nearly the only thing I was good at, or the only thing anyone had let me be good at. "Faster, Wren, said Maddox the steward, passing through with an armful of linens. He didn't even look at me when he said it. People rarely did. The king's outriders were seen on the North Road at dawn. By midday this house will be the center of the whole North, and you'll still be on your knees with the spoons. Yes, Maddox, and you'll keep to the kitchen tonight. You understand me." Lady Hargrove was very clear. "There will be highborn wolves at that table, and the sight of a—" He paused, choosing the word. "The way you choose where to step in a muddy yard, of you among them would shame the house." "I understand." He went. They always went. I had perfected the art of being the kind of presence people could deliver a cruelty to, and then simply walk away from the way you'd drop a coin in a beggar's bowl without breaking stride. I want to tell you what I was plainly so you understand the rest. I was an Omega, the gentlest, lowest rank. A wolf can be born to the ones the old songs call the soft of the pack, and 3 years before I had been rejected by my fated mate. His name was Bryce. The moon gave me to him, threaded a bond between us. I felt in my very marrow, and for one short season I believed I had been chosen at last, that my whole small, unwanted life had been a road leading to that one bright thing. And then Bryce looked at me, at what I was an Omega, with no name and no dowry and no powerful kin, and he looked at Celeste Hargrove with her beauty and her mother's wealth and her ambitions, and he made his choice. He severed the bond in front of witnesses the way it must be done. I, Bryce, reject you, Wren, as my mate. I felt it tear loose under my breastbone, and I learned that night the thing no one warns you about, that you do not die of it. You simply have to keep living, with the torn place where the bond was forever. The Hargroves took me in afterward. People praised them for it, so charitable taking in the rejected Omega. What the praise didn't mention was that charity in that house meant labor without wages, and a roof in exchange for the steady daily work of making sure I never forgot I was a burden being tolerated. And the cruelest joke of all, the one the moon must have laughed at Bryce, was Celeste's mate now. He lived under that roof too. I cleaned the room where he slept beside the woman he'd traded me for, and I told the part of me that minded to fold up small, and I went on. There was a girl in the kitchen younger than me, a scullery maid called Pip, 12 years old and always hungry. And that morning I slipped half my own bread into her apron when no one was watching the way I always did, because there is a particular kind of person who, having had everything taken, becomes a thief only in order to give. And there was a kitchen pup, a half-grown thing the cook kept for the rats that flinched at every loud voice, and when Maddox's shouting set it trembling under the table, I knelt and gathered it close and murmured to it the small, foolish comforts you murmur to frightened things, and it stilled against me, and for a moment I was warm. And then, because I could not help it, I reached into the pocket of my apron and closed my hand around the one thing I owned that was truly mine. A little wolf carved from pale wood, no bigger than my thumb, worn smooth now from years of being held in the dark. I will tell you where it came from, because it is the whole hinge of everything, though I did not know that yet. Years ago, before the Hargroves, in the bitter end of a winter, when I was barely grown and living alone in a woodcutter's hut on the edge of nowhere, a stranger had come to my door in the snow. A man badly hurt. I never learned how a wound in his side gone black at the edges, fever already in him more dead than alive. By every rule of sense I should have feared him. A strange wolf, armed half-mad with pain, I had nothing, a girl alone, no kin to avenge me if it went wrong. But he looked up at me from the snow, with eyes the gray of a winter sky, and he did not ask. He was too proud or too far gone to ask. He just looked. So I brought him in. I had almost nothing. A fire, a little broth, clean cloth, the small green knowledge of herbs my mother had left me, and I gave him all of it for 3 days and 3 nights, asking nothing, not even his name. He never told me. I cleaned the wound and broke the fever, and fed him from the same poor bowl I fed myself, and on the 3rd night, when I was sure he would live, I let myself sleep at last. I remember those 3 days better than I remember whole years of my life. I remember the weight of him too heavy for me to move, so that I had to do everything where he lay. I remember talking to him through the worst of the fever, not because he could hear, but because the sound of a voice is a rope you can throw to someone drowning in their own heat, and I had nothing else to throw. I told him foolish things. I told him about my mother and her herbs. I told him the broth was better than it was. I told him once in the deepest dark of the 2nd night, when I was sure he would die before morning, that he was not allowed to, that I had decided it, that I had not kept this fire lit through this whole bitter winter, just so a stranger could come and die at it, and his fever broke an hour before dawn, and I have never been able to decide whether that was the herbs or the stubbornness mine or his. I never feared after the first hour that he would hurt me. I cannot fully explain it. There was something in the way he let me tend him, a wariness. Yes, the wariness of a wounded animal, but under it a kind of astonishment, as though no one had ever simply helped him before without wanting something, and he did not know the shape of it, and was afraid to move in case it broke. I knew that astonishment. I had felt the lack of the thing that would have prevented it my whole life. I think that is why I gave him everything I had. I recognized him, not his face, his hunger. When I woke, he was gone. The fire was banked, the cloth folded, the hut tidied as if to leave no debt. And on the table where his head had lain was this, a little wolf carved while I slept from a scrap of my own kindling, by hands that must still have been shaking. I was the only person in my whole life who had ever taken something from me, my care, my food, 3 days of my labor, and given something back. Who had treated what I had to offer as worth a gift in return. I never knew his name. I never saw him again. And in the years since, in all the cold of the Hargrove house, that little wolf had been the single warm coal I kept banked against the dark proof that once for 3 days I had mattered to someone. I held it for a moment in the kitchen that morning. Then I put it away and got up and went back to polishing silver I would not be allowed to eat from. The Alpha King was coming. The whole house quivered with it. I thought it had nothing to do with me. I have never in my life been more wrong about anything. By midday, the house of Hargrove had become a jewel box turned out onto a table. Every candidate for Luna in the northern reaches, it seemed, had been summoned, or had summoned herself, a dozen highborn daughters in silk, the colors of autumn fruit, perfumed, jeweled each one, a small campaign of beauty, waged for a single prize. They filled the great hall like a garden, and at the head of them, of course, Celeste. Celeste, in deep red Celeste, who had been groomed for this since girlhood Celeste, with my former mate at her shoulder, like a trophy she'd won at my expense. I was in gray, servant's gray. I carried wine. It is a strange thing to be invisible in a crowded room, to move among people who have decided you are furniture to fill the cup of a woman who will not glance at the hand that fills it. I had years of practice, and still it cost me that day in that hall more than usual, because Bryce was there. And Bryce, unlike most, did see me. He made a point of it. As I passed with the wine, he caught Celeste's arm and murmured something, and she laughed a bright, carrying laugh, meant to be heard, and I knew without hearing the words that I was the joke. The rejected one. Look, she pours the wine now. Didn't she used to think she'd be a Luna? I kept my eyes down and my hands steady, and I did not spill a drop, and I counted that as a victory, because by then my victories had become very small. It happened again at the 2nd course. Bryce waited until I was close, a full jug in my hands, and then he stretched out his foot, not quite into my path, just enough that I had to check my step, and the wine slopped to the very lip of the jug, and he watched me catch it, watched me not spill, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Careful, little Omega," he said, soft enough that only the nearest few could hear, loud enough that they would. "Wouldn't want you to forget your place." Again. Celeste's laugh again. And I understood that this was the entertainment he had promised himself for the evening. Not Celeste, not the king, but me, the proof of his good fortune, the cautionary tale he got to keep in the corner of his eye all night and feel clever for having discarded. I had loved that man once when the moon told me to. I looked at him then and felt the particular cold clarity of seeing fully what a person is, and I gave him nothing, no flinch, no tears, because I had learned that the only thing crueler people cannot bear is to be denied the reaction they came for. I poured the wine. I moved on. Lady Hargrove orchestrated it all from a high seat, a hard, handsome woman who wore ambition the way other women wear perfume so thoroughly you stopped being able to smell anything else. It was she who, when the press of guests left the servants short-handed, and I was made to stay in the hall rather than retreat to the kitchen, made the arrangement that she clearly relished. "Not there," she said sharply, when exhaustion had me sink for one moment onto the end of an empty bench. "Heaven help us, the servants' table by the door. An Omega like you eats where she belongs, Wren, and it is not among her betters." She said it loudly. She said it for the room. A few of the candidates tittered. Celeste smiled into her wine. "Go on, sit there and be grateful you're permitted to sit at all." So I sat at the small bare table by the door, where the lowest of the kitchen staff took their meals in shifts, and someone set down before me a wooden bowl with a heel of bread and a thin ladle of the plainest stew, the food that did not go to the hall, and I folded the part of me that minded up very small, and I told myself it did not matter where a body eats. I told myself a great many things in those years. Most of them were lies I needed. And then the doors opened, and the Alpha King came in, and the whole bright garden of a room held its breath. I will tell you the truth. My first thought when I saw him was that the songs had it wrong. They sing of Alpha Kings as towers of rage and gold all roar in fury. He was not that. He was still the way deep water is still the way the moment before lightning is still a tall, dark figure who arrived in the room not with noise, but with a kind of gravity, so that without anyone moving, the whole crowd seemed to lean toward him. Gray eyes, a hard, unsmiling face, and a stillness so complete that it was somehow the most frightening thing in the hall, because you understood at once that whatever was happening behind it, you would never be allowed to see until he chose to show you. His name was Ronan, King Ronan of the North, and he did not look at the candidates. That was the thing the whole room slowly, uneasily noticed. Lady Hargrove had arranged her dozen jewels in a glittering row, Celeste foremost, and the king walked the length of them, with all the interest of a man passing a row of paintings he had not asked to be shown. He answered Lady Hargrove's flutterings with single words. I watched her composure begin to fray at the edges as the moments passed, and he gave her daughter nothing, not a lingering glance, not a question, not the faintest of the small attentions she had spent a fortune and a season preparing her to receive. A king is supposed to want. That is the whole engine of a choosing feast, the hunger of the powerful made into a prize the houses compete for. But this king did not seem to want any of the things laid out for him, and a hall full of people who had organized their entire ambition around feeding that want began slowly to feel the ground move. His eyes moved, but not over the candidates, over the room, over the corners, the servants, the edges, searching. I did not understand it then. I felt only a vague unease the way you feel weather coming, and I kept my eyes on my plain bowl, and I prayed as I had prayed my whole invisible life, simply not to be noticed. His gaze swept the hall once, twice, and on the second pass it stopped. I felt it before I dared look up, that gravity suddenly turned, suddenly pointed a pressure I had no name for, settling over the small bare table by the door. The titter and murmur of the hall faltered and died, and when I finally raised my eyes against every instinct 3 years had taught me, I found the Alpha King of the North standing motionless at the center of that perfumed garden of highborn daughters, and he was not looking at a single one of them. He was looking at me. At the servants' table, over a wooden bowl, the rejected Omega in servants' gray, and the king had gone absolutely terribly still. For the length of 3 heartbeats nobody moved. I have tried since to imagine what the hall saw, a girl no one had looked at all day, suddenly the single fixed point of the most powerful wolf in the north. Lady Hargrove's face frozen mid-simper, Celeste's smile beginning slowly to curdle, Bryce going very still in a different way than the king, the stillness of a man who feels the ground shift and does not yet know which way it will tip. And then the Alpha King moved. He did not hurry. I would learn that he never hurried. Hurry is for those who fear they will not get what they want, and he had never in his life had cause to fear that. He came down the hall away from the candidates, away from Celeste, away from the whole glittering purpose of the gathering, and the crowd parted before him, not by stepping aside, but by the simple impossibility of being in his path, and he walked unhurried and certain as a tide directly toward the small bare table by the door. Toward me, I rose. My legs did it without my asking. I think God helped me. I think some part of me believed I had done something wrong, had been caught, sitting where a servant ought not had drawn an eye. I had spent 3 years making sure to never draw, and the old animal fear flooded me, the fear of the kicked dog, and I dropped my eyes and waited to be told my place. He stopped in front of my table. So close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him, close enough that I could see when I dared the smallest glance that his jaw was tight, and a muscle worked in it, as though he were holding something very large behind his teeth. He looked down at my plate, the chipped wooden bowl, the heel of bread, the thin ladle of the plainest stew, the food that did not go to the hall. And the Alpha King of the North reached down and he picked it up. He picked up my bowl, my plain poor servant's bowl. He took it in his 2 hands, those hard scarred hands, and he turned and he carried it. The whole length of that silent staring hall, past the candidates, past Celeste, past Lady Hargrove half risen from her seat with her mouth open on a protest that would not come. He carried a rejected Omega's wooden bowl down the center of his own choosing feast, as though it were the most precious thing in the room, and he set it down gently, I will never forget, how gently, on the seat at his own right hand, the seat beside the high chair, the seat meant for Aluna. The hall erupted into silence so total it had a sound of its own. Your Majesty, Lady Hargrove found her voice at last, and it came out high and unsteady, her composure cracking right down the middle. Your Majesty, there has been a mistake. That girl, she's nothing, she's a servant. A rejected Omega, we took in out of charity. She doesn't belong anywhere near. I know exactly what she is, said the Alpha King. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words fell into that silent hall like stones into a still pond, low and even and absolutely certain, and they were not addressed to me. They were addressed to the whole room, to every highborn wolf who had spent the day looking through me. I know exactly what she is. And then he turned his head slowly and looked at Lady Hargrove with those patient gray eyes, and added quieter in a tone that raised the hair on every neck in the hall. The question is whether you do. Lady Hargrove had no answer. There is no answer to a king who has decided something. Her mouth opened and closed. Celeste had gone white, and Bryce, who had thrown me away as worthless, who had laughed with his new mate at the rejected one pouring wine, Bryce was staring at me as though seeing me for the first time, and the dawning horror on his face was, I will confess, the first thing in 3 years that had made me want to laugh. Then the king turned to me, and everything in his face changed. The dangerous stillness softened, not gone, but turned the way a banked fire turns when you finally let the air to it. He looked at me, the rejected Omega in servant's gray, with an expression I had no place in my whole hard life to put, and he held out his hand, and when he spoke again, his voice had gentled into something almost unbearable to hear. Come, he said, you've served long enough. I could not move. I could not speak. I stood frozen with 300 eyes upon me, and the most powerful wolf in the world, holding out his hand to me, and the only coherent thought in my head was a desperate drowning. Why, I don't understand why. And then reaching to draw out the chair for me, his sleeve fell back from his wrist, and I saw it. A scar, old silvered with years, running along the inside of his forearm, exactly where in the bitter end of a long-ago winter I had drawn a fevered stranger's torn skin, together with my own hands and my mother's herbs, and bound it with the only clean cloth I owned. The world tilted. My hand went without my willing it to the pocket of my apron, to the small, smooth weight of a wolf carved from a scrap of kindling by shaking hands. And I looked up from that scar into a pair of gray eyes, the color of a winter sky eyes I had last seen looking up at me out of the snow, asking nothing, and I felt the whole carefully folded up minding part of me come open all at once like a fist. It's you, I whispered. I don't think anyone heard it but him. The Alpha King's jaw worked. Something flickered behind the gray, something that on that hard face looked almost like fear, almost like a prayer. Sit with me, Wren, he said very low, only for me. Please. And the way he said please, a king who had surely never had to say that word in his life, undid me more thoroughly than anything else could have. I would like to tell you that I sat down at the Alpha King's right hand, and the story ended there in warmth, the way the songs end. It did not. The songs leave out the part where the rescued girl is her own last enemy. I sat. What else could I do with the whole North watching, and his pleas still hanging in the air between us? But I sat with my spine straight, and my hands knotted in my lap, and a wall going up inside me brick by brick, even as the candlelight warmed my face, because I had understood something in the moment I saw that scar, and the understanding was poison. Adept. That was what I told myself. He remembers. The stranger I saved, he lived, he became a king, and now he has found me, and he is paying what he owes. It made a terrible kind of sense. It fit the only shape my life had ever taught me to expect. No one wanted me. People wanted the things I could do for them, my labor, my care, my hands. Bryce had wanted what I'd add to his standing until something better came along. The Hargroves wanted my work. And now a king, an honorable man, had a debt of life on his conscience and had come to discharge it in the most generous way he could imagine by lifting the poor Omega out of the kitchen and seating her at his table. It was kindness. I did not doubt it was kindness. But kindness paid as a debt is only pity wearing better clothes, and pity was the one thing in all the world I could not survive being given by the man whose carved wolf I had kept warm in the dark for 3 years. Because I had let that little wolf mean something. It had no business meaning. I had let it mean I mattered to him, and now I would have to learn that I had only ever been a debt he meant to settle. And that was a rejection too, a quieter one, and I did not think there was enough of me left to be rejected twice. So the wall went up, and the house of Hargrove, recovering from its shock, set about helping me build it. They struck back the way the cornered powerful always do, through whispers. By the next morning the keep was thick with them, and they all bore Lady Hargrove's fingerprints. The Omega ensnared him. She used some trick, some herb craft, some Omega softness to bewitch the king's judgment. A rejected mate is rejected for good reason. There's bad luck in her, a taint, a danger. What kind of Luna would she make? She'll shame the throne. She'll weaken the line. Celeste wept prettily in corners about her broken heart. Bryce, that coward, told anyone who'd listen that he'd rejected me because he'd sensed something wrong in me, refashioning his own faithlessness into foresight. And the older wolves of the court, the ones who measured everything in alliances and bloodlines, muttered that it was unthinkable for the Alpha King to set a nameless rejected Omega above the daughters of great houses. I heard all of it. They made sure I heard it, and every word of it fed the wall. But here is the thing I want you to know, because it is the part of myself I am least ashamed of. The wall did not make me a coward in every way, only the one way, only about him. Because on the second night, carrying linens past the still room where Lady Hargrove thought herself unobserved, I overheard something that turned my blood to water. I had not meant to listen. The invisible never mean to listen. We simply are not noticed, and so the unguarded words of careless people fall on us all the time, and mostly they are nothing gossip complaints, the small ugly business of a great house. I would have passed by. But I heard my own name, and I stopped the way you stop when you hear your name, and I pressed myself into the shadow of the stair, with the linens clutched to my chest, and my heart going hard. She was speaking low with Maddox, and the words I caught were enough a plan. They could not strike the king, but they could discredit his choice. He has made us a laughingstock, Lady Hargrove was saying, and her voice had none of its public sweetness. Now it was flat and cold, and I understood hearing it that the simpering woman of the choosing feast had always been a costume. 3 houses promised, and he passes over my Celeste for a kitchen rat. We cannot touch him, but we can touch her, and if she fails, if the whole court sees the king's chosen Luna for the frail, tainted thing she is, then it is not we who are shamed. It is his judgment. There would be a feast in 2 nights to formally present the candidates a final time, and at it, Maddox murmured his understanding, something would happen to the Omega. An accident witnessed by all. A fit, a fall, a sudden sickness at the high table. Proof before the whole court that the rejected one was frail and tainted and unfit, that the king's judgment had failed him. I caught the word nightbane, a herb I knew well when my mother had taught me, harmless in a pinch and dangerous in a dose. The kind of thing that could be slipped into a cup to make a healthy wolf collapse, retching and witless in front of everyone. A small dose in her cup, Lady Hargrove said, enough to make a spectacle, enough that no king could keep a creature who falls to fits at her own presentation. They meant to poison me at the king's own table and let the court watch the king's chosen Luna fall to pieces. I stood frozen in the shadow of the stair long after their voices had moved on, the linens crushed against me, and I felt the old familiar pull of the only answer my whole life had ever given me. I could have run that night. Every instinct I owned screamed, "Run, pack the little wolf in your gray dress and go disappear. This was never going to be your life." And I had decided to. I truly had. My bag was half packed by the window, but I could not let them do it. Not to him. Whatever I had decided about myself, about debts and pity and walls, the man who had carved me a wolf while his hands shook with fever, the man who had said, please, I could not stand by and let his judgment be poisoned in front of his whole court by people who wanted to make his one act of grace look like a fool's mistake. The folded-up minding part of me, it turned out, had teeth after all, when it was someone else being wronged. So I did not run, I went to him. It was the middle of the night, and I was a servant, and he was a king, and there were a dozen reasons it should have been impossible. But I knew the keep's passages, the way only the invisible do, and I came to the door of his study, where a single candle still burned, and his guards, after one startled moment, let me pass because he had, I would learn, given orders that I was never to be turned away. I had not known that. It is a small thing. It undid another brick. I told him fast and low everything I'd overheard. The feast, the night bane, the plan to make him a laughingstock through me. He listened without a word, that gray gaze steady on my face, and when I finished, he was silent for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "You could have gone. You knew what they meant to do to you, and you could have simply been gone before the feast and let it fail on its own. Why didn't you?" And the wall, the great careful wall, cracked right down the middle, because I did not have a safe answer, and for once I was too tired to find a lie. "Because they were going to hurt you through me," I said, "and I would rather be poisoned than be the reason they made you look like a fool for the one kind thing you've done." My voice was shaking. "That's all. It was never about being saved. I can't be a debt you're paying, Ronan, I can't. I would rather go back to the kitchen forever than be a thing on your conscience, but I won't let them use me to wound you. Even if I'm only a debt to you, you were never only a debt to me." I had said too much. I knew it the instant it was out. I turned to flee, and the Alpha King said, "Stop, please. I am going to fix every wrong idea in your head, but I need you to hear the first one tonight before you build it any higher." I stopped my hand on the door. "You think this is a debt," he said low. "You've decided I came to repay you. Wren," he stood, "turn around. There is something you have spent 3 years getting wrong, and I find I cannot bear it 1 hour longer." I turned around. He came across the study slowly, and he stopped an arm's length from me, not touching, never touching. Without leave, I would come to learn that this was simply who he was, and the candlelight caught the scar on his forearm, the one my own hands had made whole, and he began to speak in a voice stripped of all its kingliness, just a man in the dark finally setting something down. "I have been looking for you for 6 years, he said. I stared at him. 6 years, since the morning I left that hut. I had a war to win back. That wound was an assassin's, my own cousin's hired blade, and if I'd stayed 1 more hour, I'd have lost the throne and likely your life along with it for harboring me. So I went before dawn, before you woke, because I was too far gone in shame to wake you and say what I should have said." His jaw tightened. "And then I spent 6 years trying to find the woodcutter's hut and the girl in it, and I could not, because by the time I had won my war and could search, the Hargroves had bought the land and turned out its tenant, and you were 3 territories gone, swallowed into a great house as a servant no one would ever name to a king's outriders. I had given up. I told myself you were a fever dream. And then a rumor reached me, a rejected Omega in the house of Hargrove, who tended the kitchen pup and slipped her own bread to a scullery girl, and I came to this choosing feast with no intention of choosing anyone. Wren, I came to see if it was you." I could not breathe. "You the candidates, Celeste." I never glanced at them. A short, rough breath, almost a laugh at himself. 3 of the great houses of the North will hate me for it until I die. I do not care. I walked into that hall and I searched it the way I have searched every hall for 6 years, and I found you at a servant's table eating from a wooden bowl, and I thought my heart would stop. Because you owed me. I said one last time, the wall's last brick held up between us like a shield. "Because I saved your life and you're an honorable man and you pay your debts." "No." He said it with such sudden force that I flinched, and at once his voice gentled again, but the force stayed under it like stone under water. "Listen to me, because I will only lay myself this bare once, and then never again, so that you can never tell yourself it was about a debt. Anyone might have saved my life that winter. A frightened girl, a kind farmer, a passing patrol, many people given the chance will save a dying man. That is not what I remember. That is not what I crossed 6 years to find." He took a breath. "What I remember is how. You had nothing, Wren. I have seen your hut. You had a cold hearth and a thin broth, and you fed me from the same poor bowl you fed yourself, and you never asked my name, and you never asked what I could do for you in return, because it never occurred to you that kindness was a thing you spent expecting payment. You did not know I was a king. For all you knew, I was a beggar who would rob you in the night. And you took me in anyway, and you gave me everything you had, and you asked for nothing." His voice cracked just slightly on the next words. "You were the first person in my entire life, king's son then king, who ever treated me as a man worth saving, rather than a throne worth using. Do you understand? Everyone else in the world had only ever wanted what I could give them. You were the only one who ever gave to me when I was no one, when I had nothing to offer back, but a wolf whittled out of your own kindling by hands that could barely hold the knife." I was crying. I had not cried in 3 years, and I was crying now silently, the tears just running. "I did not come to repay you," he said. "I came because I have not stopped wanting for 6 years the one person who ever saw me when I was nothing. The debt runs the other way, Wren, and it always has. I owe you the thing you gave me in that hut, the thing I have been starving for on a throne ever since, to be wanted for myself by someone who started wanting me before there was a single reason to. I am trying to give it back to you. I am asking you to let me." And then the King of the North did the thing that finished the wall entirely. He reached into his own coat, and he drew out something, and he opened his hand. A little wolf, carved from pale wood. The twin of mine, no, not the twin, the first. A rougher, older carving made years before the practice piece a boy had whittled and kept the thing that had taught his hands the shape before, sick and shaking in a snowbound hut. They made its mate for a girl who'd asked him nothing. "I have carried this since I was 12, he said. "It is the only thing I owned as a boy that no one gave me to make me into a weapon or a king. My father had me trained for the throne from the day I could walk. Every gift, every lesson, every kindness shown to me was a tool being sharpened, and I learned young to feel the hand reaching for the handle behind every smile. I made this wolf myself alone badly because I wanted one thing in the world that was not aimed at making me into anything. I kept it through the wars. I had it in my pocket the night my cousin's blade found my side, and I crawled 1/2 mile through the snow to a light in a window." His gray eyes did not leave my face. "I made yours to match it, in your hut on the 3rd night when the fever had broken, and I knew I would have to leave before you woke. I could not bear to leave nothing, and I could not bear to leave my name, because my name was the very thing that would have turned what you'd done into politics. So I left the one true thing I had ever made, and I made it a pair, so that somewhere in the world there would be 2 halves of a kindness no one had aimed at anything. I have wondered for 6 years whether you kept it, whether it was on a shelf, whether it had been thrown out, whether you remembered the stranger at all, or whether saving a dying man was so ordinary a kindness for you that you'd forgotten it by spring." I took my hand out of my apron pocket. I opened it, and on my palm lay its mate, worn smooth from 3 years of being held in the dark, smooth in exactly the places a thing wears when it has been held over and over by someone reaching for comfort in the night. He looked at it. He looked at how worn it was. And the Alpha King of the North, who had faced an assassin's blade and a war for his throne, and a hall full of houses that hated him without so much as changing his expression, looked at the smoothness of that small carved wolf, and understood from it exactly how many nights I had held it, and what it had meant to me, and his composure broke. Not loudly. His eyes simply filled, and he pressed the heel of his hand briefly against them, once the way a proud man does when he has been ambushed by something he was not braced for. "You kept it warm," he said, low and unsteady, "all this time, the way I kept mine." "It was the only proof I had," I whispered, "that I ever mattered to anyone. I didn't know it was you. I just knew that once for 3 days someone took everything I had to give and gave something back, and never once made me feel like a burden for it. I built my whole survival on a stranger's 3 days. I held that little wolf through worse nights than you can imagine, and I told myself someone once thought I was worth a gift. High might a sound I will not try to describe, and I crossed the last of the distance between us myself on my own 2 feet, the way I would later cross a hall, the way I would do everything from then on by choosing it. The feast came 2 nights later, as Lady Hargrove had planned, and it did not go as she had planned at all. The king let it proceed. He told me, the whole court to see. The candidates were presented, the cup was poured, and at the moment the Nightbane was meant to do its work, the Alpha King rose and named the plot and named its makers, and laid the whole rotten scheme open before the assembled houses of the North. For he had known every step of it in advance from a servant girl who'd chosen to warn him rather than save herself. I was at the high table when it happened, and I watched it the way you watch a wave you saw coming finally break. There was the cup set at my place, brimming by a serving girl whose hands did not quite stop shaking. There was Lady Hargrove, sweet and serene again in her public costume, watching from her seat, with the patience of a woman, certain of her trap. And there was the king, who lifted my cup before I could touch it, turned it slowly in the candlelight, and said into a hall gone suddenly quiet, "Nightbane, I think. Lady Hargrove's still room is famous for its herbs." He set the cup down untouched in the dead center of the table where everyone could see it. "She has spent 2 days arranging for this court to watch my chosen Luna fall to fits, and call it proof that a king cannot tell gold from kitchen rats." His gray gaze swept the hall, and it was no longer patient at all. "I have spent those same 2 days letting her, so that every house in the North could watch, instead what the house of Hargrove truly is, a house that would poison a guest at a feast to win an argument with its king." Lady Hargrove's house lost its standing that night. Maddox was taken by the guard, and Bryce, exposed as the small, faithless thing he was for the king, named his lies too. The foresight he'd invented to cover his own greed was sent from the keep in disgrace beside the woman he'd traded me for, and I confess I watched him go, and felt where the torn place under my breastbone had been nothing at all. Not triumph, just the quiet of an old wound finally fully healed. And when it was done, the king turned to the high table where a single seat stood empty at his right hand. He did not carry my plate this time. He had learned me by then. Instead, he simply looked at me, and he waited, the most powerful wolf in the North, waiting with his hand open and his choice unmade until I made it. So I made it. I walked to the servants' table where they had tried so hard to keep me, and I picked up my own plain bowl with my own 2 hands, and I carried it the length of that hall myself, past every highborn wolf who had looked through me, and I set it down on the seat at the king's right hand, and I sat down in it by my own choosing, a rejected Omega, who had decided to stop being rejected and start being chosen, beginning with choosing herself. Lady Hargrove, even then even disgraced, could not help one last gasp. "An Omega at the king's own table, it isn't done." The Alpha King answered her without even looking her way. He was looking at me. "She has eaten at a poorer table than this," he said, "and fed a dying stranger from it when she had nothing, and asked him for nothing in return. There is no table in this kingdom she has not earned 1,000 times over." And then softer, just for me, as he reached at last to take my hand, "The seat beside me was always yours, Wren. I only had to find you to give it to you." I had spent 3 years being told where I belonged: the kitchen, the servants' table, the gray edges of other people's bright lives. I had folded the part of me that minded up so small I'd half forgotten it was there. It turned out I had belonged the whole time in a seat I would not let myself believe was mine, beside a man who had carried my poor bowl down a silent hall to tell 300 wolves what he had known since a snowbound winter 6 years gone, that I had never for one single day been nothing. I just hadn't had anyone to carry the plate until him.